Welcome to the 34th episode of Speaking of Poetry. I am Rennie McQuilkin, Connecticut's Poet Laureate and Simsbury's as well. I am delighted to present bi-monthly readings by some of the area's finest poets, and I am very pleased today to be joined by Deming Holleran. She has been writing poems for the past 20 years. Inspired by a poetry course at Dartmouth College, she wrote a collection of verse for her master's thesis, after which she co-founded an ongoing poetry workshop, the Still Puddle Poets. Thus began a joyful collaboration with fellow poets in the Hanover, New Hampshire area, and with the Frost Place, where she has attended many summer conferences and served as board chair for 5 years. She met her husband-to-be at Harvard, where they were classmates. They've been married almost 50 years, and they are the parents of 4 daughters and 8 grandchildren. They live with their cockapoo pups in Lebanon, New Hampshire, as well as Vero Beach, Florida, and they also spend time at a family place on an island in the St. Lawrence River. An avid skier, tennis player, and golfer, Deming continues to search for a way to integrate these passions into her poetry life. Last year, Antrim House published her first full-length book of poems, Gypsy Song. Welcome to Speaking of Poetry, Deming Holleran.
Thank you so much, Rennie. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Rennie mentioned that I found inspiration by going to a number of programs at the Frost Place up in Franconia, New Hampshire. And I'd like to start with a poem that I wrote about my very first time at the Frost Place at the Conference on Poetry, when I was just a very new poet and had no idea how poets talked, lived, anything. This was written a couple of years later for a friend who was about to have that experience herself. At the Frost Place. You will cross a river, the first metaphor each day, and you will think how many sources feed the waters, and how many more will join them from the greening hills. How some trickle, others gush, and many gather force within the slopes before they stream, like words from poets' pens. You will climb the dusty road to the old, dilapidated house and writer's barn, its doors flung open in embrace, and all the milling faces will be new. You may think yourself a child at the aquarium, beguiled by all the shapes and curious ways of fishes, and ache because your wish is to be one of them. You will mimic how they glide through words in effortless suspension, while a see-through wall still hems you off, till one soft morning, while reading your new poem to someone on the lawn, you'll hear a camera's shutter click, and looking up, you'll cast a self-effacing poet's smile toward the tourist van below, and know that you belong. My childhood was marked by a number of things, one of which was that I went to exotic places. My father was a partner in a resort venture in the Virgin Islands starting in the 30s. And so I went there for spring vacations plus a week, 3 weeks every spring, to an island in the British Virgin Islands, beautiful place, and was allowed pretty much free rein on the island. This one's called Montgomery. I spent my childhood springtimes on an island in a southern sea. There, along its azure shore, grew scrubby trees dangling thick, round, shiny leaves that lovers etched with their initials. Once, I too took a sharpened twig and carved a heart enclosing a rough M. Back then, scraggly sheep and chickens eked out life before becoming dinner, and 4 sturdy burros trudged the uphill path, laden with leather suitcases, food, and 5-gallon jugs of water. Early mornings before their day's work, the island boys and I would ride those steeds across the salt flat, pursuing bandits out beyond the ruins of an ancient sugar mill. My mount was white like the Lone Ranger's, taller than the others, with wise brown globes of eyes and a soft gray whiskered muzzle that puckered up when he grabbed my breakfast sandwich, wax paper envelope and all, and slowly gnawed it with his big square teeth. His bristled mane grew helter-skelter, barely long enough for me to clutch while lurching side to side upon his bony spine. His quick, short burro steps, a full gallop in my mind, and I leading the posse out to rout the outlaw band. That I should love a burro, named for some brave general, did not seem odd, and so I asked the grown-ups if we could marry, he and I. They told me yes, and promised us the spit of land called Monkey Point for a wedding gift. The matter might have been forgotten, as burros were replaced by jeeps and romances of a different sort, but one year, barely out of childhood, I found again the leaf that bore a heart and M. Now welted scars cracked brown and barely legible, and remembered how a girl once thought a donkey would make the perfect mate. My childhood was also marked by a kind of benevolent alcoholism, and this was fine, no abuse, but one had to remember not to make oneself too needy during the cocktail hour. This is one time when it backfired. It's called The Road Home. The darkened limbs of oaks hulk overhead along the lonely roadside where the child, a Christmas pageant angel homeward bound, grasps sticks to guard against the dread of shadows, while imagination, wild and fearful, conjures reasons to condone abandonment. Why weren't they there when all the other children's parents came to call for them, proclaiming gladly what a fine production it had been, how proud they were of their own shepherd, Mary, Joseph, king, or angel? Tired, cold, forlorn, but there at last, she eyes their tight and merry knot. It is the cocktail hour, and they forgot. There's another one from that very same era and time of year called By the Chimney with Care. That year, Santa Claus delivered, perhaps because on Christmas Eve, after all the relatives drove off, when I had scrubbed dark lipstick kisses from my cheeks and Grandpa's cigar smell was fading from the velvet dress whose starched lace cuffs and collar now lay rumpled on the floor, I called my mother in to say good night and help me hang my stocking. What could I leave for Santa? I asked, thinking sugar cookies, ribbon candy, milk. Scotch, she said. That's what he really likes. I'll fetch a bottle from the bar. We left it on the fire grate with a small note signed, Love. By morning, it was gone. In its place, a bulging stocking and the key to Santa's heart. One of the inspirations for my starting to write poetry was that my mother, about 20 years ago, was becoming increasingly frail, both physically and mentally. She'd been a very vibrant person, and I didn't know what to do with this person who wasn't really my mother, wasn't with it. I didn't know what to do with the emotions around that. I'm kind of a linear thinker, and I was not used to being overcome by emotions, and especially when I couldn't even identify what those emotions were. So I started writing, initially about the earlier phases of her dementia. This one comes from an earlier date in that descent, and it's called Elder Game. I know the game that older people play, communally agreed upon, a way to circumnavigate a common word and make the exercise look less than absurd. Yet it takes decorum and etiquette to know which type of words one can forget. The skill lies in artfully concealing the momentary lapse by revealing some curious or thought-provoking feature of that mislaid name or thing or creature. You know, our friend who almost went insane after her daughter ran off with a Dane? So why last night did it chill me right through when you couldn't recall exactly who was that horrible man in World War II? Well, things just got worse from there, and the last summer of my mother's life, we took her up to our summer place in the Thousand Islands that Rennie referred to. It had been a place where we had all enjoyed being as a family, and she certainly had loved being there herself. And this particular time that we took her was different. This one is called Into the Mist. Fog shawls the island's shoulders and the silent river where a loon call lingers in the early morning light. My mother lies in the cool bedroom of her house of 50 summers. She is nearly 88 and weary, opening her clouded eyes on one more day. I see her head propped on pillows, folds of skin thinner than the faded collar of her nightgown. We are alone, and she asks, "Where am I?" I cannot answer. I do not really know. Her voice, my mother's voice, is high, as hollow as the loon's. She leans toward me, stretching hands like sparrow talons, searching for a perch. My hands meet hers, and I am pulled down into the mist, into the pillowed cloud bank and the withered scent of her. And I answer from the only place that matters now. You are with me. Maybe it's a good time for a little levity. This one is for all of us who have lost a chunk of weight, considered ourselves as totally different people, and expected the world to consider us the same way. This is called Svelte. She will wake craving cucumbers laced with dill rather than French toast. Will place her feet on the floor, feel ankle bones meet, knees too, no calves between. In the mirror, Modigliani, not Rubens, will gaze back, and the watch band will slacken at her wrist. Hip bones will rise, twin gentle hills beneath her gown. In town, slender strangers' smiles. Complicit. Jeans of different cuts beckon for the fun of trying on. Passing by store windows, she'll steal sly glances at her reflection, admiring its lines. Seat belts on a plane will need tightening. Her queen-size stockings will have to be replaced. Often I gather inspiration for poems from prompts that teachers give me, and one that baffled me for a while was down in Key West, Florida, when the poet Jane Hirschfield simply said, "Go out, see something, write," and gave us 40 minutes. Well, I saw a lot of things that didn't seem very poetic, but then I spied a dredging crane across the harbor, and that became the inspiration here. Harbor Beat. They keep it upbeat down at the pier, reggae pulsing, lunchers' toes tapping out the rhythm on sun-bleached planks, pastel umbrellas swaying lightly with the breeze, bikini babes and gay guys in tight white jeans swinging lissom hips while sipping mango cocktails by the bar. I even caught a steel crane halfway across the harbor, slow dancing, sultry. She raised her dredging arm and dipped, as though in presentation, turned a swivel in the air, and cocked her wrist, coquettish, then dropped a showering spray of sand, like a handkerchief of lace. One never knows where one's fans are going to come from, I learned when I received a letter from someone at the Social Security office. An email, I guess it was. She'd gotten my email through Yahoo, and she wrote, "My name is Julie, and I work at Social Security processing change of address requests. I am hoping I have the right Deming. It seems I do, since the Yahoo address for you matches the request you sent to Social Security. You did not send us your SSN, so it is not possible to change your address as requested. I could call you if I had your phone and get your SSN that way, or you can resend your request to us via mail with your SSN. Please advise. I also love your poem, Into the Mist. I can relate to this poem since my father is frail now at 83, and it is hard to accept this. Blessed be the serendipity that sent my letter to your inbox, Julie. Blessed, too, my oversight in failing to include an SSN in my request. I see you at your carrel up on the 17th floor of a gray-beige concrete government high-rise, computer screen in front of you, a pile of correspondence to the side, a picture of your parents on their honeymoon, pinned to the left wall. They look young and smiling and hopeful, waving from a ferry boat, which may be taking them to see Niagara Falls, up close inside the mist. Blessed be their birthday gift when you turned 10, a trilogy of Nancy Drew that fired your imagination to play the sleuth as life presented chances and modeled perseverance to pursue a lead until you find an answer. Blessed even be the resource of Yahoo for bringing my poem to you, where it managed to provide a bit of consolation as you watch your father fail. Blessed be the quirky ways two people ever get connected. This next one takes us to London. It's called My Smart Scarf, and smart is in the British term of chic. Bound for some chic luncheon spot in Belgravia, it simply slipped away, absconded like a child, dazzled by sights and faces on the bright red double-decker bus. I missed it not immediately enough, then fiercely for the harmony it stripped from skirt and blouse and shoes. And something in its absence made me ache for home and worry at the loosening of knots a trip can bring. When you telephoned last night, I wondered that you didn't care what streets I'd walked or how the Hyde Park daffodils are bursting. I'd want to know each place you went, the toothy English faces you had seen. I miss you less when I can paint a picture of your whereabouts. Like my smart scarf, which I fancy now tucked snug inside some poor woman's coat, beyond mere adornment, comforting her against the cold wind, making her unfamiliar scent its own. This is one that we who are getting older can relate to quite vividly. When I wrote it, the situation hadn't gotten quite as bad as it now is, but it's called The Little Losses. It has to do with the unconscious ways poetry can inform what's really going on inside us and teach us things about what we're really thinking about. The Little Losses. It's Independence Day, and all our small belongings are claiming theirs. I think it's willful, even diabolical, the way they play at hide and seek. My husband's wallet loves to slip between the driver's seat and door, often just before he's amassed those masculine essentials at the hardware store, inching through a checkout line 10 husbands deep. my glasses, all 8 pairs, placed with foresight next to chairs about the house, remove themselves at will. I thought I might outsmart the cell phone charging cord by buying 2, but soon the coily one went missing. No doubt it has wriggled up beneath an armchair and wound itself contentedly among the springs like a baby anaconda. The other disappeared a week ago, leaving the phone bleating like an orphaned lamb, then surfaced in my makeup bag. I often wonder whether all those things that choose to go astray see themselves as signposts, gentling us along a path toward the keener pain of deeper deprivations, of the money we thought we saved, our eyesight, or even someone's whispered name. And when I wonder this, I bless the little losses for their size. I have a few family poems here that I'd like to read, and one is a memory of our eldest daughter when she was a toddler on our terrace. A woman's work. On the pink brick terrace of our first home, our firstborn spends the afternoon filling her plastic pail on one side of her inflated pool, then turns and tips it till water spills out on the other side. Life is work, and when her work is done and the last of the necessary pailfuls empty, she crawls over the pool's bulging top ring and wobbles toward me through the sun, glances back and frowns, returns and stoops to pick her careless, dripping footprints up. About 20 years ago, not only was my mother failing, but 2 daughters came out as gay. Now, this was 20 years ago, not this year. And the atmosphere was quite different, and this took some adjusting as well. So the next 2 are for these 2 daughters. This one, our youngest, was 13 at the time. It's called Coming Out. It's National Coming Out Week, as though the calendar could summon reluctant birds to fly in unison like migrant geese. When I was your age, coming out meant white flock debutantes, flocks set free from boarding school as from a dovecote, fluttering gaily into society. Now coming out takes courage. Praise to you, my fledgling, who dared the changing winds so early, an eaglet slipping from the eyrie into flight, knowing how your wings were made to fly. And this one is for another daughter, the older daughter, who also came out. At that point, she was 22. Her sextant. Do you know the down east fog that can swallow up the rocky coast in one quick bite? Once cruising through it, I marveled as our skipper steered the boat, engines thrumming at full throttle, with nothing but a blinking screen as guide. Just so, as though possessed of some internal sonar, you always seemed to navigate the swells and depths with ease, slipping through the narrow channels where your sisters had foundered on a reef. We worried then when your swift ship rocked aimless for a time, as though your guidance system had failed. But you had only paused to call on stars, bird cry, and buoy bell before you journeyed on. And I'd like to end with some love poems as I think of them. This one is called Listen to Your Heart. Last night I heard you on the telephone counseling our daughter about a man. Listen to your heart, you said, and I thought about the doctor giving you the same advice. How you must have stepped into the pharmacy to buy the stethoscope, nonchalant as though it were a box of Band-Aids or aspirin. And how that night, sitting by the fireside, We listened to your heart, galloping across the prairie of your chest, reining in to pause, then pivoting and racing off again, the wind picking up, the sky so leaden you could taste the coming rain. Miles off, but bearing down. And the last one again takes place at the island in the Thousand Islands on one of the weeks when my husband returned to New Hampshire to work, and I was up there alone. It's called Summer Lights. Last night I lit the lovely little lanterns you'd planted improbably among geranium beds along the terrace wall. Dangling from slender, bending stems, they lilted like phosphorescent fantasies in the evening breeze above the river, till soon one faded, and then another failed. I watched, dismayed. With easy grace, you would have stepped inside the cottage to your stash of votives and replaced them, as simply as I would sew a missing button on. 1,000 times I've watched you tend the candles or wash away splashed wax from hurricane mantles to purify their gleam. Candles are what you bring to us, the good redeemed from childhood years of Catholic obligations, and my assuming your devotions feels quite wrong. And so I sat there, taking in the growing darkness, mulling over all the ways one person can light another's life. Thank you for listening.
Deming, thank you for that lovely reading. And I want to say, blessed be the listeners who will soon be coming upon you in the quirky ways or not quirky ways, who will discover you in their own fashion on their screens, be they television or computer. And I want to say that one of the things that just enchants me about your poetry is the way it goes back and forth between levity and the more somber aspects of life. Lots of each, and like Shakespeare, you don't overemphasize one or the other, but see them as a part of life in general. I'm thinking of you like Titania, the queen of the fairies, riding your burro, galloping, as it were, with the island boys, and falling in love with Montgomery, I think was his name, with the carving M into those eucalyptus. Or,
I don't know what the name of the plant was, but the
thick
leaves lasted for years.
Inscribable leaves.
Yes.
And then going from there to that heartbreaking poem in which your parents forget that you had a role in the Christmas pageant, and you go back to their pageant, which involved cocktails, and discover in that wonderful rhyming way at the end that they had forgotten you. And to go back and forth between those poles of life is a wonderful thing. Thank you for that. And I want to also thank Karen Hanville, the enormously talented station manager of SCTV here, and to Ken Picard, who produces this show and whose paintings hang on the wall behind me. And to say also that if you would like to learn more about Deming Holleran's poetry and read samples from her book, please visit the Antrim House website, antrimhousebooks.com. While there, you may be interested in other Antrim House poets whose lives and works are described on the website. Goodbye for now until we meet again next month for the 35th installment of Speaking of Poetry.